Okay, class, how we doing? Chapter 13 action, our last chapter for the summer. I'm sure you guys are all very, very sad about that. Before I go into the slides and hit some key ones here, this is a very difficult chapter. What I mean by that is it's very challenging from the perspective of the sales manager. If we were to take a 500-foot view of this chapter, and you go through and look at these items with a second look, this is still too old school. I mean, think about all the new school conversations we've had all semester. I don't know what's new school in this chapter. And I think that's the challenge, where we have this philosophy of moving towards relationships, this philosophy of long-term and getting existing customers to be more valuable than trying to find new customers. Yet you look at all the metrics, you look at all these behavioral, objective, subjective evaluations of performance, and I hate to say it, this is all old school. Right? Now, there's much work that needs to be done here, and I know that there's good researchers, and I know there's journal articles out there that are starting to tackle new school selling performance. Okay? It's happening. It's not in the text yet. It hasn't filtered down to a text yet. But just to give you little hints, especially for the students that had me last spring in the spring class, there's been a lot of measurements of customer lifetime value, and it's pretty easy to find an article or two on pretty good articles tackling the customer lifetime value equation. If this is something you're really interested in, I could send you some more references. And we, in defense of the book and in defense of Greg here, there has been discussion of customer lifetime value, and there's been an equation or a calculation or two in the text, if I'm not mistaken. But at the same time, why is that not in chapter 13 as well? It's something for you to think about. Okay? So let me see what I can go through today. One of the things that I wanted to point out that didn't come up in any of the questions is the difference between performance and effectiveness. Now, performance just might be you have the highest sales numbers of anyone else in your department. Effectiveness might be you may have the third highest sales numbers, revenue numbers compared to the other people in your department. However, because of your expense budget and because of how efficient you are, you're substantially more effectiveness, that your numbers actually turn out to be more profitable than someone who generated more revenue. It could be the case that you're in a product or a division that your product has more margin, that although you sell 2/3 less than someone in division C, their sales volume numbers are much higher because your product is so much more profitable. You're actually more effective with regards to the bottom line. Your top line, which is the revenue number, might not be as strong, so you have to look at that as well. Objective and subjective. Old school, there was really only one measure of performance, and is how much did you sell? Really. This is an objective number. Most Salesforce performances have a combination of both. I am okay with subjective measures. Subjective measures have biases, but usually the biases are baked into the measure and they're consistent across time. So maybe a salesperson might be a little tentative in their subjective measures, but they're always tentative in their subjective measures, and that number can be comparable across quarters or evaluation periods. So I'm a fan of both. You need both. And you need subjective measures from both the salesperson and the sales manager. You need objective measures primarily from the salesperson that the sales manager can look at. But the important thing is that no one metric in isolation accounts for too large of a percentage of the overall valuation. That's when there's a problem, regardless of whether it's objective or subjective. So the objective measures, there's output objective measures and there's input objective measures. And once again, I will go back to technology, and technology is solving a lot of the problems that salespeople used to have. Simply put, your cell phone, which is owned by the company, can track all the calls. There's a software program on it, and it does all those things, and you don't do a thing. You just behave like you normally behave. Emails, all that stuff happens within a CRM system. It happens within software applications. It happens, and this is getting easier to do. Used to be the case that a salesperson would blow 20% of their time just documenting behavior. And I think the number is substantially less these days. There are lots of ratios. Again, I don't believe that any one of these ratios in isolation is gold. It's nice to have them. It's nice to compare them across time periods, across salespeople, across divisions. But these help determine and how to evaluate a salesperson. It's the same way for my finance people in class, you know? Is there one financial ratio as the only financial ratio you should look at? No. You should look at a number of very good financial ratios, and a financial ratio in and of itself is not very useful. It's useful when you compare it against yourself across time, when you compare it against competitors in your own industry, your own vertical, or whatever you want to call it. That's when these ratios are more useful. Otherwise, it's just a number. All right, those are objective, subjective measures. Yes, I already mentioned the bias thing. Bias exists. I get it. But usually the bias is consistent. I've done lots and lots of salesperson research. I do use subjective and objective measures. And look, it's a limitation of the measure, but it still measures something. You know, you just have to understand that it's subjective. I don't think it's worthless. Nothing major here. Some of the problems with subjective. You know, the halo effect is when the sales manager, you know, you either did something positive or negative within the last 2 months of or 2 weeks of a reporting cycle. And that halo of the last 2 weeks influences too much of your overall evaluation for the year. You know, that's a problem. Nothing major here. Let's see if there's anything else here. Behaviorally anchored rating scale. This helps with getting rid of some bias. It helps. And a good example of it is here on slide 27. And it actually gives you what some of these endpoints should be. Very high is a 10 on a 0 to 10 scale. But it also tells you the difference between what a 10, an 8, a 6, a 4, a 2, and a 0 are. You know, 360-degree performance feedback is something that conceptually sounds like the right answer. In practice, is a complete disaster. It's very, very, very difficult. I mean, just getting honest responses from the clients to be part of your performance measure, and then you have to get them from internal members of the team, to the point where it might take a month or two for the sales manager just to collect the data needed in a 360-degree feedback. And by then, you spent so much time collecting the data, you have to turn the evaluation around. In theory, this makes perfect sense. In practice, sometimes it's just too difficult to pull off. And this was a trend that got very popular relatively quickly because conceptually it's such a good idea. And very, very few companies still do it. I think that's everything I wanted to hit for the slides. Let me answer some questions. Chapter 13, Evaluating Salesperson Performance. There are a lot of ratios you can evaluate and use. If a manager only uses numbers and ratios, is it fair for the salesperson? No, it's not fair for the salesperson. A manager cannot use only numbers, objective, and ratios, objective, to evaluate a salesperson. It's a component of the overall evaluation. It is not the evaluation by itself. Do you believe 360-degree fee performance can be delivered truthfully without damaging relationships? I actually think it can. You know, part of the problem is that sometimes it's, you know, if the salesperson could usually figure out which customer or which internal employee said what, even though it's anonymous. But the salesperson doesn't need to see it, only the sales manager. I think it can happen, but I think there is a lot other bigger problems with 360-degree performance. Mainly is it's not timely enough. It takes too long. The benefits are not worth the costs. In a mature market where cost of goods sold movement can dictate margins on a short-term basis, is it better to just use volume performance versus gross margin performance? These are two very old school numbers here. If this is your success metric that you're measuring against, then okay. There are a lot of other measures that I would rather have, like customer lifetime value. It depends on the firm. Call activity ratios to manage a salesperson seems to be micromanagement type of management style, and quite frankly leads salespeople to cooking the books. On call ratios, it used to be more micromanagement, and salespeople could more easily fudge these things. But there's apps out there, there's software out there. You're using a company phone and you got to turn over your phone records. As a matter of fact, you don't even have to turn over the phone records. The company pays the bills anyway. They get access to the calls. You know, they have interns look at the number of calls. When, what time, to whom. So guess what? It's not as micromanaging as it was in the past, and it's not as hard as it used to be either. Are there more advanced sales metrics that allow a salesperson to manage their own activity that leads to better results? Not only is there better software and technology now, it's so the salesperson can focus more on the selling and less on the reporting. That the reporting is more automated than ever before. Although firms have created so many different criteria for evaluating salespeople, when a sales manager has a personal problem with a salesperson, it would be very difficult to evaluate them fairly. This is very, very true. As a matter of fact, you have a case coming to you that's due in a couple days that has this issue in it, if I'm not mistaken. What system can or has been put in place to ensure that this does not occur? Most firms have a way for the salesperson to evaluate the sales manager as well. You know, it's not a one-way evaluation, it's a two-way evaluation. And there are some situations where a salesperson has to be moved. Or the manager has to be moved, but there has to be movement. Because if there is a personality conflict, there is a personal problem with a particular salesperson, then there needs to be change. Many, many times the salesperson gets put in charge or sent to a different scenario with a different sales manager. That is pretty common. The BARS rating, behaviorally anchored rating system, probably more objective than an evaluation form, but it could be as objective as having an outside service rep come in to look at the forms. Well, guess what? The outside service rep still has an opinion here. And I don't know how much long, meaning that there is still some subjectivity here. Usually what happens is the outside person tends to be someone internal to the firm. Like someone from HR, someone from accounting, someone from finance, someone else. It's more timely that way as well because it's internal, not external. But yes, some of these behavioral ranking systems, though, they get sent out for calculation, but the reports come back. I don't know if that's really what you were getting at. I enjoy reading about the Heider concept of task difficulty. Is it more important to understand and consider the differences in sales territories? None of them is like the other. I can see that often that these differences are not considered during performance evaluation due to bias. How do you guard against evaluation bias? Well, actually, historical performance within a territory by salesperson and by previous salespeople goes into the evaluation process. You know, if you're a pharmaceutical rep and you have Manhattan, you know, you are rated differently than someone who has the same drug in Des Moines or Madison, Wisconsin. You know, there's no question that the territory goes into the evaluation. Every territory has some kind of forecast or estimation of what really that territory could do. You could have a really big market like Boston, but because there's a hometown pharmaceutical firm in there that has history, you just don't get any market share there. And if that's not part of your performance evaluation, then your sales manager's not doing a good job. My company evaluates sales performance constantly. I sure hope so. At all hours of the day, instantly across countless metrics. If sales performance means total revenue for your firm, then I get it. What is the right amount of performance to put in place, especially in a retail organization? Well, retail organizations tend to be top-down, and retail organizations tend to be more old school than not. For every Zappos, there's 250 non-Zappos out there. It's a function of the culture. Zappos can get away with what they do performance-wise because they're Zappos, and that's part of the corporation ethos. But in retail, you know, they're really checking you on they could probably even break it down more by the, not only the day, but by, certain peak times during the day. The numbers come in that fast. The right amount of performance is a function of your firm. You have to decide. Some firms really Walmart does look at daily sales by store and by region. And you're talking about Walmart and the scale of Walmart. All right, this wasn't a question, but it was in more than half, if not more, of your nuggets. I was shocked that only 15 of the top 500 CEOs had frontline sales experience. Okay, let me translate. That means 15 of the people started as a salesperson within the organization. Like, they literally started as a salesperson. Now, this is a little bit deceiving because there are a lot of firms that, quote unquote, don't have a sales division. They have customer representatives, or they have product lines, and the manager is in charge of the entire product line or an entire region. And these people wouldn't say that, oh, I came up through sales. They're like, well, I'm in charge of the P&L for this division. Well, how can you be in charge of the P&L for the division if you're not involved in the selling side of it? So this number is a little misleading. It's a lot higher than that, trust me. The text lists several different performance metrics in comparison. In your opinion, which metric is the most effective at measuring a sales organization? I apologize for being vague, but it's really a function of what your sales organization values. Some sales organizations value how long you keep your customers. Some sales organizations value how often your customers purchase. If that's their success metric, then those are the metrics you're using to measure success or effectiveness of a sales organization. Some firms only care about the total number, the top line number, revenue, and your expense number. Some firms only care about the margin number and your gross percentage margin number. You know, I apologize for not being more specific, but that's really the best answer. In certain circumstances, when an employee needs to modify his or her behavior to improve numbers and an amount of sales made, is it sometimes difficult to suggest this? No. Sales managers tend to be very direct. They don't mix words. You're not a sales manager if you mix words, because you guys are in charge of the revenue. He or she has to be direct. Now, if the salesperson does not alter their behavior, you know, if their numbers are so great and a suggestion is made, but the numbers maintain their greatness, i.e. they're one of the top 3, 4, 5 salespeople in the whole group, then okay. But if you're in the middle, if you're basically sitting at 50% and your sales manager is giving you suggestions to alter your behavior, you know, he or she tells you directly and you do not do it, well, guess what? The onus is on you. You know, that's not going to bode well going forward. They might give you 1, 2, or 3 quarters. They're not going to give you 6 or 8 quarters. They can't, because the salespeople are in charge of revenue for the firm. How do sales managers determine what is the best way to critique or suggest particular changes to an employee? They're very direct. They legally have to be very direct. You know, yes, some salespeople might need a little smooth talking. They might need a little small chit-chat beforehand. But you have to be very direct. There's no other way to do it. There's no beating around the bush here. Why would a company choose to use only subjective evaluation measures? Because they're lazy? Sorry for being sarcastic. Because they don't have the resources to do anything else. It's probably the best answer. Objective measures is actually harder to do. You know, even if we talk about, the bigger problem is not subjective. The bigger problem is only using 1 or 2 or 3 evaluation measures, regardless of whether they were subjective or objective. You know, this also goes to this next question, which is, there are so many problems with subjective measures with regards to performance evaluation. Why do managers do it? Well, again, it is a way to collect data, and it is a data point, and as long as you do it consistently over time, there's data there, there's information there. We all know what the biases are. Guess what? There's biases with objective measures as well, too. The book is biased towards objective measures, but I know there's problems with objective measures. You know, what is the best way for a salesperson to prepare for both an expected positive and expected negative? I'm not sure what to say here. It's much easier to prepare for an expected positive, but you usually know when an expected negative is coming. You know. You can clearly see that this quarter or this year, compared to previous years, that you are down. You can try to come up with ways to justify their performance, but, you know, hopefully you get a chance to dialogue with your sales manager. And hopefully you get more than one opportunity to correct. You know, a negative review is really bad if it's one negative review and you get fired. A negative review is not really bad if you get a negative review and you get an opportunity to correct. If you really don't get a fair shake at an opportunity to correct, then how do you prepare for a negative review? By polishing your resume. Because the culture in your firm is damaged and they're not going to give you a chance to change it around. If there are so many problems with subjective, I already did this one. Do many firms use the 60-degree feedback system? Not as many as there did 10 years ago. I'm 100%. You can even do a Google search about the downsides of 360-degree feedback and the amount of time and the ability to really get the customer data, a lot of times in the development of the relationship, you kind of don't want to go to the customer for something like this, other than a simple single item thing that's not really all that meaningful. Conceptually, 360 degree is great. In practice, it's really too challenging. I can't think of a firm that relies on it up and down and has been quoted in the media about them being a big fan. Okay? Thank you for your time. I thank you for your energy, and we are out.